And legal arguments that could determine who represents you in Congress and here under the Gold Dome began today.
Attorneys are arguing redistricting negatively impacts black voters. The trial's outcome could loosen the grip Republicans have over the U.S. House of Representatives.
This is all connected to a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision. Earlier this year, the High Court rejected Alabama's challenge to the Voting Rights Act. According to the act, voting district lines cannot result in discrimination against minority voters. The act says those voters must be given a chance to elect a candidate of their choice. Political reporter Doug Reardon is diving headfirst into the trial.
Doug, the Voting Rights Act, it is key legislation that ensures black votes matter.
Right, guys, and it is at the center of this trial. It's the very crux of it, specifically Article 2 that deals with people's ability to vote for their chosen candidate. Now, if the judge decides in favor of the plaintiffs in this case, it could send Georgia lawmakers back to the drawing board to make sure that our congressional maps and districts actually represent Georgia's growing black population. Between 2010 and 2020, Georgia's black population added almost 400,000 residents, and the state's white population lost around 50,000. But when Georgia's GOP lawmakers led the charge on redrawing political maps in 2021, a majority black district disappeared, along with the black U.S. House lawmaker who held the seat.
Most states, and certainly here across the South, redistricting is very much a political process.
Charles Bullock is a UGA professor who wrote the book Redistricting, the Most Political Activity in America. He said if a federal judge decides in favor of plaintiffs like the American Civil Liberties Union and some religious groups, Georgia lawmakers will likely have to redraw the lines to give black voters more representation as a group.
So he may say, well, over in this part of the state, over here, you could have drawn an additional district. Take a good look at that legislature and see about doing that.
District maps are supposed to take geography and demographics into account. According to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, minority groups have the right to vote as a bloc when there are large populations in certain areas. In fact, on Tuesday, a judge in Alabama sent lawmakers there back to the drawing board over maps that were unfair to black voters.
If you were to swap out, 5, 6 Republicans for Democrats and nothing else were to happen, say in 2024, that could change the balance of power.
With an election coming up in 2024, new maps could shift the balance of power in Congress from Georgia and in other states with challenges to their maps like Louisiana, Florida, and Texas. And Republicans, keep in mind, have a slim 10-seat majority in the House of Representatives. This trial is expected to last about 2 weeks. We'll give you updates as we get them. We're live in downtown Atlanta. Doug Reardon, Atlanta News First.